David sat alone. The living room was dim. Only a single lamp illuminated the space. He stared at a photograph. It was a picture of his wife, Sarah, and their daughter, Lily. Sarah's smile radiated warmth. Lily giggled, a mischievous glint in her eyes. David traced his fingers over Sarah's face. The photograph felt cold. The silence of the room pressed in on him. It was a heavy silence. It was the silence of absence. He remembered the sound of her laughter. It used to fill these rooms. Now, only echoes remained. He closed his eyes. He could almost hear her voice. It was a cruel trick of his memory. He opened his eyes again. The photograph was still there, a stark reminder of what he had lost. The house felt too big now, too empty. Every corner held a memory. Every room whispered her name. He ran a hand through his hair. He felt the weight of fatigue settling on him. It was a bone-deep weariness, a weariness of the soul. He wished he could hear her voice one more time. He wished he could feel her hand in his. He wished he could see her smile again, just once. But wishes were empty things, like the spaces in his heart. Like the silence in his home, he was adrift in a sea of sorrow, lost and alone. S1, Media, man looking lost and alone in his home. The hospital corridor stretched out before him. It seemed endless. Harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air was thick with antiseptic. He remembered the frantic pace, the hurried footsteps of doctors and nurses, the beeping of machines.
Sarah?
He gripped Sarah's hand. Her skin was clammy. Her eyes were filled with fear. He tried to reassure her.
Everything will be all right, I promise.
But his voice trembled. He felt a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. The doctor explained the procedure, the risks.
We will do everything we can, Mr. David, but you must understand the risks involved.
David listened, but the words seemed to blur together. He could only focus on Sarah's hand in his. He remembered the sterile white of the operating room, the cold, metallic gleam of the instruments. He remembered the moment they wheeled her away, the doors closing behind her, leaving him alone in the corridor. The fluorescent lights seemed to mock him. The silence was deafening. He paced back and forth.
Please, God, please.
Each tick of the clock felt like an eternity. He prayed. He bargained with God. He would do anything, anything to have her back. He felt helpless. He felt like he was drowning in a sea of fear. He was trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. He picked up the photograph again. He stared at Sarah's smiling face. The guilt gnawed at him.
I should have told you I loved you more often. I should have spent more time with you. I should have taken you on that trip to Italy.
The trip they always talked about. Now it was too late. The regrets echoed in his mind. They were relentless. They whispered accusations in his ear. He closed his eyes. He tried to shut out the voices. But they were always there, haunting him. He remembered the arguments, the petty disagreements, the times he had been too busy with work. He had taken her for granted. He had assumed she would always be there. He had been so wrong. He opened his eyes. He looked at the photograph again. He saw the love in her eyes, the love that he had failed to appreciate, the love that he had lost. The regret was a heavy burden. It weighed him down. It suffocated him. His boss's voice droned on. David stared blankly at the papers on his desk. He couldn't focus. The words seemed meaningless. His mind was elsewhere. It was with Sarah. It was in the hospital. It was lost in a maze of grief.
David, are you listening? I asked about the quarterly reports.
David didn't hear him. He was lost in his thoughts. His boss repeated the question.
David, the quarterly reports?
Yes, the reports.
It was incoherent. He knew he wasn't performing well. He knew he was letting his team down. But he couldn't seem to care. He felt disconnected from everything, from his work, from his colleagues, from the world around him. He was just going through the motions, a ghost in his own life.
David, are you all right? You don't seem yourself lately.
His boss expressed concern. He asked if David was all right. David forced a smile.
I'm fine, really.
It was a lie. He was far from fine. He was broken. He was lost. He was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, a weight he could barely bear. He walked through the park. The air was crisp. The leaves were changing color. He caught a whiff of Sarah's perfume. It was faint but unmistakable. He stopped in his tracks and closed his eyes. He inhaled the scent. It was the perfume she always wore, the perfume he loved.
Sarah?
He could almost feel her presence beside him, could almost hear her voice. He opened his eyes and looked around. He was alone. The scent faded. He felt a pang of sadness, but also a flicker of something else, a flicker of warmth. He realized he wasn't alone. He had his memories. He had the scent of her perfume. He had the love they shared. And that was something precious, something he would always cherish. He sat on a park bench. He watched children play. Their laughter echoed through the air.
Lily's laughter.
He wondered how he would explain it to her, how he would explain that her mother was gone. He felt the weight of his grief again. It was a heavy, unseen burden, a burden he carried everywhere he went, a burden he couldn't escape.
I have to be strong for Lily, both a mother and a father now.
He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he had to try. He watched the children play. He saw the joy in their faces, the innocence in their eyes.
I have to find a way to bring that joy back into my life. For Lily. For myself.
He knew he had to find a way to bring that joy back into his life. For Lily. For himself. He returned to the empty house. The silence greeted him. It was no longer deafening. It was just empty, like a hollow echo of what used to be.
He walked into Lily's room. He looked at her toys scattered on the floor. He saw her drawings on the wall. He felt a pang of sadness, but also a surge of determination. He picked up one of her drawings. It was a picture of him, Sarah, and Lily. They were holding hands. They were smiling. He smiled, a genuine smile, the first one in a long time. He knew he couldn't bring Sarah back, but he could keep her memory alive. He could make sure Lily knew how much her mother loved her. He could create new memories, memories filled with love and laughter, memories that would fill the empty spaces in his heart.
He sat in the living room again. The single lamp still illuminated the photograph. He looked at Sarah's smiling face. He didn't feel the same overwhelming sadness. He felt a sense of peace. He realized that grief wasn't something to be overcome. It was something to be lived with. It was a part of him now, a part of his story. He knew it would always be there, but it wouldn't always consume him. He felt a crack in the darkness, a sliver of light piercing through the clouds of grief. He knew the journey wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to take the first step. He realized that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about remembering. It was about cherishing the memories. It was about finding a way to live with the pain and finding a way to love again. He stood up. He walked over to the window. He opened it. He breathed in the fresh air. He felt the sun on his face. He looked out at the world. He saw the beauty in the everyday things, the things he had taken for granted before. He saw the vibrant colors of the trees. He heard the chirping of the birds. He felt the gentle breeze on his skin. He realized that life goes on, even in the face of loss, even in the midst of grief. Life goes on, and he had to find a way to live it, to embrace it, to cherish every moment. He took a deep breath. He felt a sense of hope, a sense of renewal. He knew he had a long way to go, but he was no longer lost. He had found his way back to himself. He had taken the first step on the road to healing. He walked into Lily's room. He woke her gently. He told her he loved her. He held her close. He felt her small arms around his neck. He felt her warmth against his chest. He knew he wasn't alone. He had Lily. He had his memories of Sarah, and he had the hope of a new beginning. A beginning filled with love and laughter. A beginning filled with the promise of a brighter future. He looked at Lily. He saw Sarah's eyes in hers. He saw the spark of life. He saw the seeds of hope. He knew that together, they would get through this. They would heal. They would find a way to live again. And they would never forget Sarah.